Marcus Williams adjusted his tie nervously as he walked through the bustling Atlanta airport with his wife Sarah and their twin 8-year-old daughters, Maya and Zoe. The family had just finished a relaxing vacation in Miami, and Marcus was eager to get home to Chicago. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to leadership, though few people would guess that this soft-spoken man in casual clothes was the CEO of Skyline Airlines, one of the fastest-growing regional carriers in the United States. Sarah held the girls' hands as they made their way to Gate B12. The twins chattered excitedly about their trip, still wearing their matching dolphin t-shirts from the aquarium they had visited the day before. Marcus smiled watching them, grateful for these precious family moments away from the demands of running an airline company. When they reached their gate, Marcus noticed something that made his stomach tighten slightly. The waiting area was nearly empty despite the flight being listed as full on the departure board. A few passengers sat scattered around, but the usual pre-boarding crowd was nowhere to be seen. He glanced at his watch and confirmed they were right on time. At the check-in counter stood Rebecca Mitchell, a flight attendant with 15 years of experience who took pride in maintaining what she called proper standards on her flights. She had perfectly styled blonde hair, a crisp uniform, and an expression that suggested she took her authority very seriously. Rebecca was known among her colleagues for being strict about rules, though some whispered that her enforcement seemed particularly harsh with certain passengers. As the Williams family approached the boarding area, Rebecca's eyes immediately fixed on them. She took in Marcus's casual khakis and polo shirt, Sarah's simple sundress, and the children's tourist t-shirts. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly, but Marcus caught the change. He had seen that look before, unfortunately, and knew what was likely coming. "Excuse me," Rebecca called out, her voice sharp and authoritative. "Are you traveling together?" Marcus nodded politely. "Yes, we're the Williams family. We have seats in first class." Rebecca's eyebrows raised skeptically. She looked them up and down again, her gaze lingering on their casual vacation attire. "I'm going to need to see your boarding passes and identification." Sarah fumbled in her purse for their documents while the twins pressed closer to their parents, sensing something was wrong. Marcus kept his expression calm, though his jaw tightened slightly. This was exactly the kind of situation he had hoped to avoid during their family trip. "Here you go," Sarah said, handing over their boarding passes and IDs with a nervous smile. Rebecca examined the documents with exaggerated care, holding them up to the light as if checking for forgeries. Other passengers in the waiting area began to notice the commotion, some turning to stare at the family. Marcus felt the familiar burn of embarrassment and anger, but he kept his voice level. "Is there a problem with our tickets?" he asked quietly. Rebecca continued her examination, taking far longer than necessary. "These are first-class seats," she said, as if stating something impossible. "How exactly did you pay for these tickets?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment, and Maya tugged on her mother's dress, whispering loudly, "Mommy, why is the lady being mean?" Marcus placed a protective hand on his daughter's shoulder. "We purchased these tickets like any other passenger," he said, his voice remaining steady despite the growing attention from onlookers. "I find that hard to believe," Rebecca said, her voice loud enough for others to hear. "These tickets cost over $800 each. Are you sure you didn't get these through some kind of assistance program?" The implication was clear, and Marcus felt his patience beginning to wear thin. He had built his airline company from the ground up, working 18-hour days and sacrificing countless family moments to create something meaningful. Now he stood here, being questioned about his ability to afford tickets on what was essentially his own aircraft. "Ma'am," Marcus said, his voice taking on a firmer tone, "we are legitimate passengers with valid tickets. We would like to board the plane now." Rebecca seemed to take his assertiveness as confirmation of her suspicions. She stepped closer, lowering her voice, but not enough to prevent others from hearing. "Sir, I'm going to need you to calm down. Getting aggressive isn't going to help your situation." Marcus hadn't raised his voice or made any aggressive gestures, but he recognized the tactic. Create a narrative, control the situation, and make the victim seem like the problem. He glanced around and saw other passengers watching with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. "I am calm," Marcus replied evenly. "I'm simply asking to board the flight we paid for." Rebecca turned to her colleague, James, a newer flight attendant who had been watching the interaction with growing unease. "James, call security," she said loudly. "We may have a situation here." James hesitated. He had seen Marcus's identification and boarding passes, and everything appeared to be in order. The family seemed respectable and polite, and he couldn't understand why Rebecca was escalating the situation. "Rebecca, maybe we should just—" James began. "I said call security," Rebecca snapped. "These people are trying to use fraudulent tickets," and when I questioned them, he became belligerent. Sarah stepped forward, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and anger. "We are not fraudulent passengers. My husband is a businessman, and we saved for months for this family vacation. We have every right to be here." Rebecca's smile was cold and condescending. "Ma'am, I understand you want to travel in style, but first-class accommodations are for paying customers. Perhaps there are some seats available in coach if you'd like to purchase legitimate tickets." The twins were now visibly upset, with Zoe starting to cry softly. Marcus knelt down to comfort his daughters, his heart breaking that they had to witness this humiliation. He whispered reassurances to them while his mind raced through options. He could reveal his identity and end this immediately, but part of him wanted to see how far Rebecca would take the situation. As the CEO of Skyline Airlines, he needed to understand exactly what kind of treatment passengers might face from his own employees. Security guards arrived within minutes, two large men who approached the family with professional caution. Rebecca immediately launched into her explanation, painting the Williams family as potential criminals trying to defraud the airline. "These individuals are attempting to board with what I believe to be fraudulent first-class tickets," she told the guards. When I questioned them about their ability to pay, the male became aggressive and threatening. One of the security guards, Officer Rodriguez, looked at the family and then at Rebecca with obvious confusion. The family stood quietly together, the father comforting his crying children while the mother held their legitimate documents. Nothing about their behavior seemed aggressive or threatening. "Sir, can you show me your identification and boarding passes?" Officer Rodriguez asked politely. Marcus stood and handed over the documents again. Rodriguez examined them carefully, checking the computer system on his handheld device. Everything appeared to be legitimate and properly purchased. "These tickets seem to be in order," Rodriguez said to Rebecca. "The payment went through, and the seats are properly assigned." Rebecca's face reddened with frustration. "That doesn't mean they're legitimate. These people clearly don't belong in first class. Look at how they're dressed. Look at their children's behavior." Maya and Zoe had stopped crying and were now staring at Rebecca with the confused hurt that only children can express when faced with inexplicable adult cruelty. Sarah wrapped her arms around both daughters protectively. "Ma'am," Officer Rodriguez said to Rebecca, "having a dress code for passengers isn't standard airline policy. If their tickets are valid and they're not causing a disturbance, I don't see grounds for removal." Rebecca's authority was being challenged, and she didn't like it. She had made her decision about this family the moment she saw them, and she wasn't going to back down now. "I'm the senior flight attendant on this aircraft," she said, her voice rising. "I have the authority to remove passengers who I believe pose a risk to flight safety or who don't meet our standards for service. These people are clearly not appropriate for first-class accommodations." Marcus finally spoke up, his voice calm, but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. "And what exactly makes us inappropriate? Our skin color? Our casual clothes? The fact that our children acted like normal 8-year-olds after being publicly humiliated?" The waiting area had fallen silent. Other passengers were now openly staring, some recording the incident on their phones. Rebecca realized she had an audience, which only seemed to make her more determined to prove her point. "Sir, you're playing the race card, and that's exactly the kind of manipulation I expected," she said. "This has nothing to do with your ethnicity and everything to do with your behavior and your suspicious tickets." Marcus felt Sarah's hand on his arm, a gentle reminder to stay calm for the sake of their children. But inside, his anger was building, not just for himself, but for every passenger who might face this same treatment when he wasn't there to witness it. The situation had reached a breaking point. Rebecca was clearly not going to back down. The security guards looked uncomfortable but uncertain about their authority, and other passengers were becoming restless. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. "Officer Rodriguez," Marcus said quietly, "I'd like to speak with your supervisor and the airport manager. This situation has gone far enough." Rebecca smiled triumphantly. "Of course you want to complain. That's what people like you always do when you don't get your way." What Rebecca didn't know was that Marcus Williams wasn't just any complaining passenger. He was about to become the most expensive mistake of her career, though she wouldn't learn that truth until it was far too late to take back her words and actions. As Officer Rodriguez made the call for his supervisor, Marcus looked at his family and made a silent promise. This kind of treatment would never happen to another family on his airline again. But first, he needed to see exactly how deep this problem went. Airport security supervisor Linda Hayes arrived at Gate B12 within 10 minutes, accompanied by airport manager David Chen. Both had been briefed on the situation during their walk from the main office, and both were already concerned about what they might find. Discrimination complaints were serious business in the airline industry, and they could result in massive lawsuits and public relations disasters. Linda Hayes was a 20-year veteran of airport security who had seen every kind of incident imaginable. She approached the situation with the methodical professionalism that had earned her multiple commendations. David Chen, meanwhile, was relatively new to his management position, but understood the importance of handling sensitive situations correctly. "I'm Supervisor Hayes," Linda announced as she approached the group. "Can someone explain what's happening here?" Rebecca immediately launched into her version of events, speaking rapidly and with growing agitation. "These individuals attempted to board with suspicious first-class tickets. When I properly questioned them about the legitimacy of their travel, the male became aggressive and confrontational. I believe they may be attempting to defraud the airline." Linda turned to Marcus with professional courtesy. "Sir, would you mind sharing your version of events?" Marcus spoke calmly, recounting the interaction from his family's perspective. He described Rebecca's immediate suspicion, her invasive questioning, and her assumptions about their ability to afford first-class tickets. As he spoke, Sarah stood beside him with their daughters, who had grown quiet but remained obviously upset. David Chen examined their boarding passes and identification documents personally. Everything appeared legitimate, properly purchased, and in order. He also noticed something else that made him increasingly uncomfortable with Rebecca's actions. "Mr. Williams," David said carefully, "I notice your tickets were purchased through our premium corporate account system. Are you traveling on company business?" Marcus nodded. "In a way, yes. This was a working vacation, but we upgraded to first class using my company's travel benefits." Rebecca scoffed loudly. "Corporate account? What company would give him access to premium travel benefits?" The question hung in the air, and Marcus realized he was at a crossroads. He could continue to let this play out and see how his own airline systems would handle the situation, or he could end it now. Looking at his daughters' tear-stained faces, he made his choice. "Skyline Airlines," Marcus said quietly. David Chen's face went pale. Rebecca laughed, thinking she had caught Marcus in an obvious lie. "Skyline Airlines?" Rebecca repeated mockingly. "You expect us to believe you work for Skyline?" "Sir, I'm a senior employee of this airline. I know everyone in management, and I have never seen you before." Linda Hayes was examining her tablet, cross-referencing Marcus's information with various databases. What she found made her stomach drop. She stepped aside and made a quick phone call, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. Meanwhile, Rebecca continued her tirade, feeling vindicated by what she perceived as Marcus's desperate lie. This is exactly the kind of dishonest behavior I was concerned about from the beginning. Now he's claiming to work for my own airline. The audacity is incredible. Other Skyline Airlines employees had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Among them was Captain Patricia Morgan, who was scheduled to pilot the flight to Chicago. Patricia was a 15-year veteran pilot with an impeccable reputation and a no-nonsense attitude about passenger treatment. "What's the situation here?" Captain Morgan asked David Chun. Before David could answer, Rebecca jumped in. "Captain Morgan, we have passengers attempting to travel on fraudulent tickets, and now they're claiming to work for the airline. I think we need to have them arrested for attempted fraud." Captain Morgan looked at the Williams family, taking in their obvious distress and the twins' tear-stained faces. Something about Rebecca's aggressive behavior troubled her. In her experience, legitimate security concerns didn't usually involve humiliating children. Linda Hayes finished her phone call and returned to the group, her expression grim. She approached David Chun and whispered something in his ear that made his face turn even paler. "Rebecca," David said slowly, "I think we need to take a step back here." But Rebecca was too committed to her course of action to read the warning signs. "Mr. Chun, I appreciate your position, but I have 15 years of experience with this airline. I know fraud when I see it, and I know who belongs in first class and who doesn't. These people are clearly trying to travel above their means and lie about their circumstances." Marcus watched this exchange with growing amazement. Rebecca was doubling down even as evidence mounted that she was making a serious mistake. He realized this was probably not an isolated incident, and that thought made him angrier than any personal slight could. Captain Morgan approached Marcus directly. "Sir, I apologize for this confusion. May I see your identification?" Marcus handed over his driver's license and his corporate identification card. Captain Morgan examined both documents carefully, and her expression changed immediately. She looked up at Marcus, then back at the ID, then at Rebecca with barely concealed shock. "Rebecca," Captain Morgan said slowly, "do you know who this is?" Rebecca waved dismissively. "He claims to work for Skyline, but that's obviously a lie. I've never seen him before, and I know everyone important in this company." Captain Morgan held up Marcus's corporate ID where Rebecca could see it. "This is Marcus Williams. He's the CEO and founder of Skyline Airlines." The gate area fell completely silent. Other passengers who had been watching the drama unfold looked stunned. Rebecca stared at the ID card as if it might be a hallucination. "That's impossible," she whispered. "The CEO is He's what?" Marcus asked quietly, though he already knew what she had been about to say. Rebecca's face went through a series of emotions: disbelief, confusion, terror, and, finally, desperate attempt at damage control. "Mr. Williams, if you're really... I didn't know. You don't look like..." "Like what?" Sarah asked, speaking up for the first time since the supervisors had arrived. "Like a CEO? Like someone who could build a successful company? Like someone who belongs in first class?" The implications of Rebecca's treatment were now crystal clear to everyone present. She had made assumptions based on the Williams family's appearance and had acted on prejudices that had no place in customer service, let alone in the airline industry. Captain Morgan was the first to speak into the stunned silence. "Mr. Williams, on behalf of all professional Skyline employees, I want to apologize for this treatment. This is not representative of our company's values." Marcus nodded to Captain Morgan, appreciating her professionalism. Then he turned to David Chun and Linda Hayes. "I'd like to understand how this situation developed and what policies are in place to prevent it from happening to other passengers." Rebecca finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of her mistake. "Mr. Williams, sir, I was just doing my job. I was trying to protect the airline from fraud. I didn't mean any disrespect." Marcus looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and sadness. "Ms. Mitchell, In your 15 years with this airline, how many passengers have you questioned about their ability to afford their tickets? Rebecca stammered, unable to answer honestly without further incriminating herself. How many of those passengers looked like my family? Marcus continued. How many were well-dressed, white families that you subjected to the same interrogation you just put my daughters through? The silence was damning. Rebecca realized that her career at Skyline Airlines had just ended, though the full consequences of her actions were still to come. Linda Hayes stepped forward. Mr. Williams, we'll need to file a full incident report. This kind of discrimination is unacceptable, and there will be consequences. David Chun was already thinking about the public relations nightmare this could become. Videos of the incident were likely already being uploaded to social media, and the story of a CEO being discriminated against by his own employee would spread rapidly. But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about all the passengers who had faced similar treatment, but didn't have the power to fight back. He was thinking about families with children who had been humiliated and traumatized by employees who were supposed to provide service, not judgment. Mr. Chun, Marcus said, I want a complete review of our passenger service policies and discrimination training programs. This incident suggests we have systemic problems that go beyond one employee's behavior. Rebecca made one last desperate attempt to salvage her position. Sir, I understand you're upset, but I was following company policy. We're supposed to be vigilant about suspicious activity. Marcus turned to face her directly. Ms. Mitchell, what exactly was suspicious about a family with valid tickets, proper identification, and 2 crying children? What company policy authorizes you to question passengers about their income or suggest they belong in coach based on their appearance? Rebecca couldn't answer because no such policy existed. She had acted on personal prejudices and then tried to use her authority to justify discrimination. The flight to Chicago was delayed while the incident was documented and statements were taken. Other passengers, many of whom had witnessed the entire exchange, provided accounts that consistently supported the Williams family's version of events. As the investigation unfolded, Marcus made a decision that would reshape how Skyline Airlines approached customer service and employee training. Rebecca Mitchell's actions had revealed problems that ran deeper than one person's prejudices, and he was determined to address them comprehensively. The humiliation his family had endured would serve a purpose, ensuring that no other family would face the same treatment while traveling on his airline. But first, there would be consequences for those whose actions had violated the basic principles of respect and equality that Marcus had tried to build into his company's culture. Rebecca stood alone at the gate, watching her 15-year career crumble around her, finally understanding that her assumptions about who belonged had cost her everything. The CEO she had never seen before was about to become the most important lesson of her professional life. The next morning, Marcus Williams sat in his corner office at Skyline Airlines headquarters in Chicago, reviewing the detailed incident reports from Atlanta. His assistant had compiled statements from passengers, security footage from the gate area, and a preliminary assessment of Rebecca Mitchell's employment record. What he discovered made the previous day's events even more troubling. Rebecca had a pattern of complaints against her, though none had been properly investigated. 3 passengers in the past 2 years had filed discrimination complaints specifically naming her, but each had been dismissed as isolated incidents or misunderstandings. One complaint involved a Hispanic family questioned about their documentation despite having proper tickets. Another involved a young black businessman who Rebecca had insisted must be traveling on someone else's ticket. Sarah entered the office carrying 2 cups of coffee and a folder of her own. As the company's director of human resources, she had spent the morning conducting her own investigation into their employee training and oversight programs. How are the girls? Marcus asked, accepting his coffee gratefully. They're confused, Sarah replied, settling into the chair across from his desk. Maya asked me this morning why the airplane lady was mean to us. Zoe wants to know if we did something wrong. Marcus felt the familiar anger rising in his chest. His daughters shouldn't have to understand discrimination at 8 years old, but Rebecca's actions had forced that painful education on them. What did HR find? He asked, focusing on the business implications. Sarah opened her folder and spread several documents across his desk. We have a problem, Marcus. A big one. Rebecca's incidents aren't isolated. We found patterns of similar behavior from employees in Atlanta, Dallas, and Miami. Always targeting passengers of color, always questioning their legitimacy, always creating confrontational situations. She handed him a particularly disturbing report. This one from last month. A black family with 3 young children was removed from a flight in Dallas after a flight attendant claimed their children were disruptive. Security footage shows the children were quiet and well-behaved. The family missed a funeral because of the delay. Marcus read through the report, his jaw tightening with each detail. Why wasn't this escalated to corporate? Because our regional managers handled it as individual customer service issues, not as discrimination patterns. They offered vouchers and apologies, but never investigated the underlying behavior. The phone on Marcus's desk buzzed. His assistant announced that Rebecca Mitchell had arrived for her termination meeting, accompanied by her union representative. Marcus had insisted on conducting this meeting personally, despite advice from his legal team. Send them in, Marcus said. Rebecca entered the office looking haggard and defeated. She had clearly spent the night realizing the full implications of her actions. Her union representative, Tom Bradley, was a seasoned negotiator who knew they were fighting an uphill battle. Mr. Williams, Tom began, we appreciate you meeting with us personally. Ms. Mitchell realizes she made some errors in judgment yesterday, and she's prepared to accept appropriate disciplinary action. Marcus gestured for them to sit. Ms. Mitchell, I've reviewed your employment record. Yesterday wasn't an error in judgment. It was a pattern of discriminatory behavior that my airline will not tolerate. Rebecca finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Sir, I never meant to discriminate against anyone. I was trying to protect the company from fraud. By questioning a family's ability to afford tickets based on their appearance, by suggesting they belonged in coach because of how they looked, by traumatizing 2 8-year-old girls in front of a gate full of passengers. Sarah opened another file. Rebecca, we found records of similar incidents involving you over the past 2 years. A Hispanic family, a young black professional, an elderly Asian couple. Each time, you questioned their legitimacy without cause. Rebecca's face crumpled. I was trained to watch for suspicious behavior. I was doing my job. Marcus leaned forward. Show me the training manual that says a family's race makes them suspicious. Show me the policy that authorizes you to question passengers about their income. Tom Bradley shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Williams, while we acknowledge serious mistakes were made, MS. Mitchell has 15 years of service with no major incidents. No documented incidents sarà corrective, because complaints were dismissed or handled at lower levels. But the pattern was there. Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking the busy airport. Ms. Mitchell, do you understand what you took from my daughters yesterday? They experienced racism for the first time in their young lives, and it happened at their father's company. They'll remember that humiliation for the rest of their lives. Rebecca was crying now. I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. If I had known who you were. That's exactly the problem, Marcus said, turning back to face her. Your behavior should have been the same regardless of who we were. A family deserves respect whether they're traveling on vacation or the CEO is traveling with his children. Tom Bradley made one last attempt. Mr. Williams, Ms. Mitchell is willing to undergo sensitivity training, accept a suspension, and issue a public apology. Surely termination is excessive for a first offense. Sarah slid a thick folder across the table. This isn't a first offense. These are copies of every complaint filed against MS. Mitchell, every incident report that mentioned her behavior, and statements from colleagues who witnessed her patterns of discrimination. The room fell silent as Tom reviewed the documents. His expression grew more grim with each page. Marcus returned to his seat. Ms. Mitchell, your employment with Skyline Airlines is terminated immediately. You're also banned from working for any airline in our partner network. Your actions yesterday weren't just wrong. They were potentially illegal, and they've exposed the company to significant liability. Rebecca looked up through her tears. Mr. Williams, this job is all I have. I worked for airlines my entire adult life. Please, give me another chance. You had 15 years of chances, Marcus replied. Every time you treated a passenger with suspicion based on their appearance. Every time you made assumptions about who belonged where. Every time you let prejudice guide your actions, you had a chance to change. Yesterday was simply the day your choices caught up with you. After Rebecca and Tom left the office, Marcus and Sarah sat in heavy silence. The termination was necessary, but it didn't solve the larger problems they had uncovered. What's the plan going forward? Sarah asked. Marcus pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. Complete overhaul of our training programs, mandatory diversity and inclusion education for all customer-facing employees, and a new reporting system that ensures discrimination complaints reach corporate level immediately. He paused, thinking about his daughter's questions that morning. I also want to establish a passenger advocacy program. Families who experience discrimination should have direct access to our corporate office, not just vouchers and apologies from regional managers. Sarah nodded, making notes. The legal team wants to discuss settlement options for the families Rebecca targeted. We're looking at potentially significant financial exposure. Good, Marcus said firmly. Those families deserve better from us. We failed them long before yesterday. His phone buzzed with a message from his security team. The incident at Atlanta had gone viral on social media, with videos and commentary spreading across multiple platforms. The story was being picked up by news outlets, with headlines like CEO experiences discrimination on his own airline and Skyline Airlines employee removes black family, doesn't recognize CEO. Marcus read through the social media comments, noting the mix of outrage, support, and, unfortunately, some defending Rebecca's actions. The incident had touched a nerve, sparking broader conversations about discrimination in air travel. Marcus, Sarah said softly, you could have ended this yesterday by identifying yourself immediately. Why didn't you? Marcus considered the question carefully. Because I needed to see how far it would go. I needed to understand what our systems would do when faced with discrimination. If I had pulled rank immediately, we never would have discovered the pattern of abuse or the failures in our complaint handling. He looked at a photo on his desk of Maya and Zoe from their Miami vacation, their faces bright with joy and innocence. My daughters paid a price for that knowledge, and I'll regret that forever. But maybe their experience will prevent other children from going through the same thing. Over the following weeks, Marcus implemented sweeping changes at Skyline Airlines. Every employee underwent new diversity training. Reporting systems were overhauled, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination was established. The company also launched a public awareness campaign about passenger rights and respectful treatment. Rebecca Mitchell's story became a cautionary tale within the airline industry. Her 15-year career ended because she allowed prejudice to guide her professional decisions, creating a pattern of discrimination that ultimately cost her everything when she targeted the wrong family. For Marcus and Sarah Williams, the incident reinforced their commitment to building a company culture based on respect and equality. They had learned painful lessons about the gaps between corporate values and employee behavior, but they were determined to close those gaps permanently. The twins eventually understood that the mean airplane lady had been wrong, and that their parents were working to make sure other children wouldn't face similar treatment. It was a hard lesson in injustice, but it came with the reassurance that their parents had the power to make positive changes. Marcus often reflected on that day in Atlanta, recognizing it as a turning point for both his family and his company. Rebecca's assumptions and discriminatory behavior had exposed systemic problems, but they had also provided an opportunity to build something better. The cost of prejudice, Marcus learned, was measured not just in lost jobs and damaged reputations, but in the trauma inflicted on innocent families and the trust broken between companies and the communities they served. Rebuilding that trust required more than policy changes. It demanded a fundamental commitment to seeing every passenger as deserving of dignity and respect, regardless of appearance, background, or circumstances. Rebecca Mitchell never worked in the airline industry again, her career destroyed by the assumptions and biases that had guided her actions for years. Her stories serve as a reminder that authority without compassion and professionalism without respect could destroy not just careers, but the basic human dignity that every traveler deserved.